It's time for another episode of Espresso Yourself with Chuck. And now, coming to the mic, your host, Chuck.
Welcome to another episode of Espresso Yourself with Chuck. I am pleased to have a New York Times best-selling author with us and a Kansan. So welcome, Alex Grecian.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, this is really exciting for me. We've had an author on before, but this was a former player for the University of Kansas, Jeff Gelbner. So he was a probably one-time author. He didn't do it as a living, and you have for some time. Before we get into that, though, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Yeah, I am a Kansan. I've lived here my entire life. And I have been a published author for probably, I think, the last 14 years, I think. I didn't sell my first book until I was 40. Um, and I now have my eighth novel coming out this year, and I'm working on my ninth. So,
And so we may jump around a little bit. Is the eighth novel the second of the Red Rabbit? Is it the sequel for the Red Rabbit, or?
yes, in September of 2023, Red Rabbit came out, and the sequel will be coming out this year, 2024. It's called Rose of Jericho.
Okay. Okay. And we'll talk about Red Rabbit.
Sure.
Um,
I'm out of order, I guess.
well, I took you there. So and I interrupted you
Oh,
also.
no.
So first published at the age of 40, but let's go back high school. What were your interests? Did you always know you wanted to be an author? Did you think you wanted to, be an astronaut or something else? When did that all kind of evolve to your current path?
I'd be a terrible astronaut. Yeah, I always knew I wanted to be an author. I didn't know what form that would take, though, right? I wanted to be a novelist, but I also wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist. I wanted to be a comic book writer and artist. Um, I had a lot of different interests, but they all formed around storytelling in one form or another. So in high school, I was the newspaper cartoonist. I wrote book reviews for the newspaper, the school paper. I worked on the school yearbook. So anything I could do to get something published in that, even in that sphere of my peers, I tried.
And what sparked that interest early on? Was it reading, or you just like to be creative, or you just love telling stories to people? How did that all manifest itself?
I'm not great at actually telling stories to people, but writing them, I think I do okay. Um, yeah, my father, well, I was alone a lot as a child, and so I read a lot, and a lot of different kinds of things. And my father, later, when I was a teenager, was a writer. He wrote commercials for a local radio station, and then eventually he became a published playwright. Um, so in that sense, I could see that it was a thing you could do to make a living. But on the scale that I wanted to do it, I didn't know how to get there because I didn't want to write for a local, I didn't want to write commercials. I eventually did write commercials. That came later, but I wanted to write books and comics and stuff that everybody could read.
Great. And so, if I remember correctly, you were Topeka West. Was that right? Or
In Topeka, I went to Highland Park High School,
oh, okay.
my first 3 years, and then I transferred. Custody changed between my parents, and I transferred my senior year to Topeka West.
Okay.
And there I got to be in a writing workshop put on by Mike Prince, who was the librarian there at that time. And he's gone on to be a very famous person within the book industry, within the book world. There's a big award named after him. And he was really very formative in terms of um, helping the students in that workshop understand that you could do this thing.
Great. When you were at Highland Park, I assume some of these things that you had talked about, yearbook, newspaper, whatever, some of those other things that you were doing there, this wasn't all at Topeka West, or?
Mostly it was at Topeka West.
Okay.
I did work on the yearbook at Highland Park a little bit. I designed some yearbook covers, that kind of thing. But there was the first part of high school was not good for me. I did not enjoy my high school experience. And I didn't know how to express myself or do the things that I wanted to do. It took a while for me to actually get ambition or a sense of being able to do things or being worthy of doing things.
So what was it was it just this particular teacher at Topeka West, or was it, okay, this is my last year. If I'm going to do this, I need to do it now, or it just clicked, because that happens too.
Yeah, I think a little bit of all those things. It was that librarian.
Librarian, yeah.
It was the journalism teacher, and it was at a given point, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and so the school was generous in that it gave me independent study time, and so I used that to go out and interview local writers and write about them, and so I got to sort of soak up their experience a little bit on my own, and I think I was working on my own because I'm sort of an autodidact. That sort of empowered me a little bit because being a writer, you really have to be self-motivated.
Right. So you were able to do a lot of these things as a senior in high school. Is there a college degree for authors? I mean, what did you think your next step was, and what was it, and what helped the most after you left high school to get you on your current path?
Okay. Um, it gets complicated from there.
Life does, right?
I went to KU in Lawrence with an English major, but I flunked college algebra twice, and I decided that for what I wanted to do, I probably didn't need a degree because everybody I knew or talked to who had the degree I was going for taught. And I knew I'm terrible at teaching. I don't have that gift. And so I this is a bad message for students, but I dropped out of college and just tried to do
Well,
my own thing while working.
yeah, so you dropped out, and I think we tell our students every day, college is not the path for a lot of folks. What are your
Not for every
goals?
job. No,
What are your
yeah.
dreams? You can accomplish those on a number of different career paths, and clearly you have. So you left KU. What did you do then to kind of get on that path of an author?
I will say, like having long-term goals, thinking long-term is crucial. But I didn't know that yet. So I worked in retail for a while, and then I worked for a small printer publisher in Lawrence for a while, and then I got headhunted by an ad agency in Topeka. But the thing that helped me most was marrying well. Um, I think like most of the successful writers I know have a supportive partner or spouse or friend or somebody who gives them that emotional support and sometimes financial support to be able to do this really weird unstable, financially insecure thing that that I do.
So you worked for the ad agency, or the you were headhunted, and then what happened? Were you still writing all this time and keeping things in a desk drawer, or?
Right. So what I was doing all that time, when I was working in retail, I worked for Office Depot and Kinko's, and so I got a discount on copying, right? And so I would make my own little books and distribute them. I would make little mini comics and distribute them. And while I was doing that, show and tell here, I did there was a movement at the time. I don't think people still do it, but it's called 24-hour comics. And that meant you were supposed to have no plans at all, take 24 hours, don't sleep, and write and draw a 24-page comic book story. And just to hone your skills, just so you had the practice and you would have something under your belt, a complete story. And so I did that. One weekend, I went ahead and did that, and I took it to work and I copied it as a little, 8.5 by 11 paper. I folded it in half, stapled it, and then I took it to comic book conventions and passed it out. And it got some notice. It got reviewed in a magazine. And then it was chosen to be part of an anthology of 24-hour comics that also has a story by Neil Gaiman, and a bunch of other much bigger people than me at the time. So that was a lucky break that I could have capitalized on, and didn't, and just continued to make my little mini comics and pass them out. But eventually, um, I worked at the ad agency, and while I was there, they didn't want me to do anything else. So I stopped, sort of self-promoting. But then we had a child, and I became a stay-at-home dad. And that sort of broke everything open for me because I had the time. I had fewer constraints on me creatively. I didn't have a lot of energy. But I decided with my wife's support to pursue my dream and finally, do the thing that I'd always wanted to do. And so that really broke things open for me. And I continued to make copies of my own little stories. And I took one of those to the San Diego Comic-Con. And I'm probably getting way ahead of where you want me to go here.
No, that's great.
Okay. And I showed it to every editor in comic books that I could find. And I was standing in line to talk to an editor with my little story. And there was a guy in front of me, and he's really short, and he doesn't mind if I say so. And I could see over his shoulder, and he was showing his portfolio to the editor, and the editor was like, that's not what we're looking for. Get out of here, kid. And it was my turn to show him, and I had pretty much the same result. But my wife was there with me, and I was like, that guy's stuff is awesome. Chase after him and give him my contact info. And she did. And he called me that night. And his name is Riley Erasmo. And he draws Batman now and all kinds of stuff. But at the time we were both just trying to break in, and we helped each other. So we decided to collaborate on something, and that got published and led to a regular comic book series. So I broke in basically by just finding the right person to help and to help me.
So Riley knew how to get something published. I mean, he was talking to this editor, or did you guys figure that out together?
Neither of us had been really published.
Okay.
At all. But we had met editors. We knew how to talk to editors by that point, from going to comic cons, showing our stuff, networking with people. I hate that word networking. I'm not very good at that, but just meeting people and talking to them. So we put a pitch together, which is you say what your story is going to be, and you have just a few pages of art with it, and you send it to editors. And we picked an editor and sent it to him, and he got back to us and said, I don't know you guys. You guys are nobodies. I'm not going to approve a whole graphic novel based on just a couple pages of art. You would have to have the whole thing to interest me. So we did the whole thing. And we sent an entire like 60-page book to him, and he was like, okay, I'll publish you. uh, so that we basically, and we continue doing that. We basically broke in by doing all the work up front, with no safety net. Um, we sold that graphic novel. It was a very small publisher, and we used that to talk to Image Comics. And we said, hey, we've got this graphic novel and we want to do something else. And here's our next pitch. We sent that in to Image Comics and didn't hear anything. So we thought, okay, the pitch didn't work last time. They wanted a whole thing from us. So we did the entire first issue and sent it to Image of what we wanted to do. And we didn't hear anything. And so we did the entire second issue and sent it to Image, and we didn't hear anything. And so we did the entire third issue and sent it to Image, and finally got a message back that said, where are you guys's color files? We're not finding them in our server. And we're like, what? And they said, we approved you after the first issue you sent us. Didn't you get our email? No. So we made it, and fortunately we had done 3 issues by then, or we would have been way behind schedule because we were supposed to be doing that. So we basically just bulldozed our way in, just by continuing to do it.
So the first one you said was 60 pages. Is that a normal length? I grew up reading comic books, Superman, Batman. It didn't seem like they were that long. So these are graphic novels. Is that, what's the standard
You're
length?
talking about something then that's more of a book, right?
Okay. And was Proof the first one, or is that the first one with Image?
That's the first one with Image. The first one was called Seven Sons.
Okay. And so once you got in with Image, then that really kind of
I think we did 32 issues of Proof, I think. And it was never awfully successful. But it's had an afterlife. It's always been optioned for film or television from that point. And since we own it, we have complete control and everything over it. But it was, at the time, it was a little depressing because we weren't really making a living at it. We were working very hard. And we did an arc called Julia. It's the fourth book of Proof. This isn't Proof, just that was set in Victorian England. And from that, through another complicated series of events, I had the opportunity to write a Victorian novel, and so we canceled Proof, and I did that. And that was a big gamble, because it took me more than a year to write it, and I wasn't doing anything else at the time, so it paid off though.
Which was that? Which one was that? The first?
Was The Yard.
Okay. The Yard.
Hey, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. So what, and there are several sequels to The Yard.
Yeah.
And I've just read The Yard. Looking forward to reading the others. I was struck by the detail. And so you mentioned that Proof was set in Victorian London, which of course The Yard is as well. Had you been a fan of that period of time and that specific location throughout your life, or what brought you to that time period in that particular place?
Sure. I mean, as a kid, I read Sherlock Holmes. I read Tarzan, I read Wind in the Willows. It seemed like at least half of everything I read was British, and then the Victorian period. For some reason, I think a lot of Americans are fascinated by Victorian England. Maybe for the same reason they are, the Old West in America. It's pretty much the same time period. There's a lot of upheaval and technological breakthroughs, and squalor and lawlessness. I was always interested in that, and then I did a lot of research for proof that there was nothing I could do with it after the comic, so I wanted to do more with it.
When you talk about the research, you've been doing research through your reading early on in your life, but I was struck by the detail in the writing. Not only, I mean, just characters, murders. I mean, but then I found myself trying to find maps online of 1889 London so I could, oh, hey, there you go. So did you actually spend time in London? Obviously, it's changed quite a bit since 1889, but still Trafalgar Square is there. And, it's Europe. They don't destroy buildings like we do in the United States and build a new one.
Well, the war over there,
Well, you're right.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I didn't. We didn't make it to. I had never been. I had been to Canada. I had been to Ireland once. That's where I proposed to my wife. But I had never been to England when I wrote The Yard or its first sequel. The summer after the Black Country, which is the second of my books, came out, we went and spent a month there, and I got to go to all the places I wanted to actually see to write about. But everything, I mean, I'm in Kansas, and there's up until a given point, I didn't have the opportunity to go to places and do those things. So books were everything. And obviously the internet, now I do a lot of research there, but backing that up with books and getting a feel for a time and place by reading about it, it gives you more. You're immersed in it more than you are online. And even just reading the fiction of the time told me a lot about how people viewed the society and what was important to them.
One of the characters in The Yard is a forensic scientist, basically. I mean, he works in the morgue, and I don't want to spoil it, but he talks about things that are pretty common today, but it was at that period of time new, revolutionary, progressive. So was that a whole other line of research that you did, or how did that all, I mean, because clearly, well, either you're faking a lot of people out, which is, certainly possible, but
that's my job.
Like, how much time did you spend researching forensic pathology or that kind of thing?
A lot. I love research. I do. That's my favorite part of the job, honestly, just learning new things. I'm not great at being taught things, but I love learning things. So like, just as an aside, in Red Rabbits, they ride a Wells Fargo coach. So I learned all about how they made Wells Fargo coaches and how big they were, and none of that is in the book. But I felt like it would help me understand it better and how it rode and how comfortable it would be and that kind of thing. The character you're talking about in The Yard is based on Bernard Spilsbury, who is a real the first real forensic scientist, who did pioneer a lot of this stuff. But his life went in a different direction than I wanted to with my book, so I renamed him and sort of fictionalized him. I also sort of fudged fingerprinting, the beginning of fingerprinting is big in the Yard. But that actually happened a couple years after the book, so I fudged the timeline a little bit there.
Okay, which is fine. The concept was there.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah. So The Yard, your first novel, did well. I mean, I mean, it was critically acclaimed. Is that fair or not?
It's still my biggest book, The Yard. It landed on the New York Times bestseller list for a couple of weeks. They sent me out on book tour, which is a cool thing I'd always dreamed of, going on book tour. And I came home because it fell off the list, and it was off the list for a week, and then went back on the list for 2 weeks, which was unusual. So they sent me back out on a second book tour, which was exhausting, but really cool. So yeah, it was a surprise. That was my big breakthrough.
What was it like to see your work on the New York Times bestseller list?
It's it's hard to describe. The Yard, I got very lucky. There was an auction for it when I turned in the manuscript. And seven publishers were bidding on it over 2 days. And well, this isn't helpful at all, is it? But I my agent called me the morning the auction started, and I was so overwhelmed. I just went and got a haircut. I couldn't I had to be away from my phone, away from everything, just sit in a chair with an apron on and get my haircut. Yeah, it was pretty overwhelming. I imposter syndrome is huge with writers anyway, and I still have it. But at the time, I didn't feel like I belonged in that world at all.
What's amazing, and this is just on the book itself, but the New York Times book review said, if Charles Dickens isn't somewhere clapping his hands for this one, Wilkie Collins surely is. Well, I didn't know who Wilkie Collins is, so my bad, but I certainly know who Charles Dickens is. So when people are talking about your work like that, I mean, that's pretty impressive. So does that, I mean, you already had motivation to continue to write because that's what you love to do, but did that give you any more motivation, inspiration to continue your craft or do something different, or continue? Had you always planned on doing more in this series with the Murder Squad?
No, well, not exactly. I thought it was going to be a one-off book. And then I didn't know what I was going to do after that. Maybe go back to comics, maybe, but during the auction, my agent called and said one of the editors wants to know if you have a sequel in mind because they would be interested, and I did not. But I said yes, of course I did. And so he said, "Great, can you send me over the synopsis of the second book?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll have it in a couple hours." And so that's where the second book came from. And so the Yard was like a 2 book deal. So once that came out, I knew I had to second a book, but that was terrifying because it did kind of in a way too well. Um, I was afraid to write a second book because I was going to fail at that because the first book was a fluke, right? And so I wrote The Black Country. I was just sweating the whole time I wrote it, and I wrote it about half again, um, as long as it currently is. I just threw everything I could think of into that book because I knew it had to be good, and then I had to cut out, my gosh, a couple hundred pages of material from that book
Wow.
because it was a big sloppy mess.
Wow. So what is your process? I've read that, some authors are very structured. They'll do an outline and they know what the outcome is going to be when they kind of start writing, filling in the outline. How do you write? What is your method, if you care to share?
Yeah, so there are two kinds of writers, like generally the terms that we throw around are plotter, which is what you're talking about, or pantser. And plotter outlines everything, knows what's going to happen, and fills in the blanks. That's like my James Patterson is a plotter. A pantser jumps in without knowing anything and just no safety net, just goes day to day. And I'm one of those. I have some ADHD. I can't. I tried outlining one time, and that felt like I had written the book then, and so I couldn't write it. I had to move on to the next thing. So I never know what's going to happen next. I figure if I'm surprised, maybe I can surprise you. I go to bed and think about what character I want to write the next day, what might, what that character wants, what might happen to him, and I get up in the morning and I write that. But it never goes the way I thought it was going to go the night before, and I'm constantly surprised.
And is this all in your mind, or like, do you have sheets with each of the characters and, okay, this person may want to do this, or is it just all right here?
It's all somewhere in there. I don't know where though. I think I don't want to sound flaky, but I think the subconscious mind has a lot more going on than we know. I'll go to bed with a problem that I can't figure out. Um, I just killed the character that was supposed to be there at the end of the book, and I don't know, what's going to happen now. And by the time I'm sitting down at the typewriter, at the keyboard to write, that ages me, typewriter. Uh, it's there, so I don't know what goes on, but I'm happy for it.
So the characters obviously critical to the story, the book, whatever. And you just said sometimes you kill them off, and maybe you didn't intend that they would, but over the course of the story, as it develops, that happens. When you've done so many in the series, like with the Murder Squad, does it hurt you when one of your characters dies? One of these characters that you've had for a long time? I mean, is that like a personal loss?
Yeah. I love all my characters. But there's no story if bad things don't happen to them, right? So yeah, I've killed characters in that series, and in everything I've done that I didn't want to kill, that I had affection for, but I write murdery stuff, so somebody's gonna get killed.
That's right. That's right. So Red Rabbit is your most recent, is that right?
Yes.
It was in
Yeah.
September of 23. So as you tell me this and how you write, it sounds like Red Rabbit started as something different than it actually ended up being. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? I because I don't know how to describe the genre. Maybe it's like well, why don't you describe it since you wrote it?
Well, genre is a weird thing. I never pay attention to that as I'm writing, because the story comes first, and then marketing people can put whatever genre label they want to on it. But all of my books are mashups of one sort or another, whether I mean them to be or not. And Red Rabbit was going to be just a Western. I was just writing a Western. Um, yeah, I've said this, but like my son hates Westerns, and I love them. And so I thought I'll try and write a Western that would be fun, that he might like. And I started writing this story about a posse going after a supposed witch, that's just, been blamed by a community for all their woes. And then at a given point in the book, it turned out she was actually a witch. And so from there, suddenly there are ghosts and demons and all kinds of stuff in there. So somebody puked up a toad, and like out of nowhere as I was writing, and I thought, what's up with that guy? So that became a whole part of the mythology of it, which
And
sounds
have
like I
you,
don't know what I'm doing, but 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 I mean, these things come out and you sort of weave them together, and then you go back and you go over a piece of work again and again and again and again and again, and you resolve the things that came later with the things that you've already written, and try to make a piece of it.
has your son read it?
No.
Okay. So, we talk about the successes in any vocation, any career, especially artistic. There are bound to be failures. I'm assuming that there have been, or has been at least one. How did you deal with that? Because clearly you're still writing and
Yeah, well, in this, I suspect, like every career, well, of course, every career has its ups and downs, and there's rejection everywhere. But writers and artists in particular, because the work is so subjective rather than objective, there's a lot of rejection. An editor may get a story that they just don't have room on their slate for, and so you're rejected and you think it's you and it's not. Or sometimes you're so close to the work that you've written something that's terrible and you love it. So you have to have kind of a thick skin. You have to, if you don't believe in yourself, you have to have somebody who does, or at least it helps. And you just have to keep going. No matter what other people may tell you not to, but you have to keep going. So yeah, my first novel that I wrote before the art uh, didn't get published. My second novel that I wrote didn't get published, but they did get me an agent. Um, I've had 3 unpublished novels, which is a lot of work. But every writer I know has unpublished books that just get put away and nobody ever sees them. I tried my first novel that didn't get published. I tried going back just a few years ago. Once I was established and had been published, I liked the idea of it still, and so I went back and rewrote it and sent it to my agent, and he got back to me and said, "You made it worse." So so I mean, you as a writer, you have what do they say, 10,000 pages of crap in you before you write something that's any good. So you have to get all the bad stuff out of your system before you can hope to write something good. You're going to write a lot of bad stuff, but you have to just keep going until you get to the point where you're writing good stuff.
that's great advice. So just, I guess that's almost a philosophical thing. Keep going, persevering, resilience. But what you talked about having an agent, what are some of the steps if someone wants to pursue this career? What are some of the things you would recommend they do in addition to obviously having talent, or honing your talent, and persevering? What are some of those things, like getting an agent perhaps, or, what are those milestone events that are going to at least give you a better chance of being successful as an author? Assuming you
Well,
can write.
okay. So you can write, and if you really want to write, if that's what you need to do, then you'll get there. You'll acquire the skills, and professionalism is hugely important. If you want people to look at your stuff, you have to be somebody they want to talk to. You can't be off-putting or rude or entitled or anything like that. and you have to format things correctly. So these days you can go online, but this book was invaluable to me when I was starting, just to see how everything has to be formatted. I'm out of the cameras. Everything has to be formatted a specific way to get people to look at it. But there are three real career paths, and if you want to do what I do, you can be self-published, which these days is perfectly fine and cool. It just means you also have to know or be willing to market your work and to publicize it, to hire an editor, to hire a book designer, or know how to design a book. There's a lot of work. But then there are also avenues to get that out there. So you can self-publish, or you can be published by a small press publishers, some of which don't require that you have an agent to submit to them. So you can go online and look at every publisher, like go to a bookstore, look at the books that you like, see who publishes them, then go to their website and see what they require to submit to them. And so that's a viable route. Or you can want to be traditionally published by the big houses in New York, and for that you have to have an agent, 100%. It doesn't work anymore to try to submit to editors. And getting an agent is very, very hard. You have to send query letters. You have to send samples of your writing. A lot of agents' client lists are closed. So, it's possible to be rejected by an agent just because they're full up. They don't have the time or energy to spend on a new person. I was lucky. My agent had just started. He had been an agent's assistant, and told me that he was going to have an opportunity to sell his own book. His boss was going to let him try selling his own book. And if I wrote The Yard as a novel instead of a comic book, which was my original plan, he thought maybe he could sell it. So I started writing it with that in mind. So it was just like the situation with Riley. It was two people who were just, starting and could help each other. So I started writing it. I finished it more than a year later and sent it to him, not having talked to him in quite a while, and got a bounce back response that said he's no longer here. He's no longer with this agency. And so I panicked. But I found him, and he had moved to a different agency and was a full-fledged agent. And so he took the book from there. So there was some luck involved there, but it was also sort of two-pronged, because it was depending on somebody else who's depending on me, not just depending on a stranger to look at the thing. We brought each other up.
You've been very generous with your time.
I've been monologuing. Sorry.
No, it's great. I could spend a lot more time, but like I said, you've been very generous with yours. Do you have a preference? And I say that, and I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, but do you prefer the novel over the graphic novel, or is it just anything that allows you to kind of develop these characters and tell a story?
Because of the way that I work, not knowing what's going to happen next, writing a graphic novel is really hard for me, writing a comic, because it's very structured. You have a certain number of panels per page. Usually you don't want to go over 5. You have a certain number of pages per issue. Usually it's not more than 20 in a regular comic. And a certain number of words that can fit in a panel. So it's very limited, very structured. You have to outline. You have to figure out ahead of time. You have to have some little moment at the end of each page to make people turn. Whereas with a novel, you don't know where the page is going to end when you're writing it, because it'll flow differently. Um, and you don't know how many pages it's going to be. You don't know, you can kill the main character. If you're writing Superman, you can't kill Superman. You have more control writing a novel, and at the same time less structure, which is an interesting dichotomy that I love. So I much prefer writing novels, but I like the collaboration of comics, though, of graphic novels, getting to see my words changed into something else that I didn't expect. So that part of that is fun.
Few more questions, I promise.
Oh,
So writing is clearly the probably the most joyful part, but you mentioned book tours. Is that something, and what is that something that you view as something you just have to do? How much do you enjoy traveling around, and you get to meet a lot of interesting people, I assume, but is that just something you have to do, or is that something you look forward to doing?
quarantine changed it a little bit,
Mm.
to be honest. I used to see it differently than I do now. In in fact, like there was a time I probably wouldn't do this podcast even because
Sure.
or any podcast, because I thought I wanted to be like JD Salinger or something, be a recluse. But so yeah, they would send me on book tour, and I loved meeting readers. I loved meeting booksellers, but you're on a plane every morning. You're in a different hotel room every night. You're exhausted. You're not eating well. You're drinking too much, and it's all, you can edit that part out, but it's just a blur, and you're very tired. And I always got sick when I came home. So I would lose working time, because you're also not writing while you're on the road very much. So I used to not hate it, because there were aspects of it that I did love. But then without it for 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however long that was, when I didn't go on book tour, I missed it. And so this last time with Red Rabbit, I looked for the joy in it, and it really thought more about how lucky I am to be in a position where I get to do this thing that, as a kid I dreamed of doing. So yeah, I like it. I didn't used to, but I like it.
So I guess this is a follow-up, so it doesn't count as the next question.
Okay.
Um, where can people get Red Rabbit? I mean, I know Barnes and Noble here in Topeka has it, or
Yeah,
did
round
last
and
time I
round
was there.
table.
Round Table.
Yeah, in Noto. Yeah, Barnes and Noble's great. Uh, Round Table has signed copies, and anywhere, wherever you live, whatever bookstore has it, or they can order it.
Yeah.
I don't like to push Amazon, but they have it too.
So Round Table, tell us about that, then the signed copies. You can order those online through Round Table.
Yeah, yeah. And every once in a while, I have sort of a partnership with them. Every once in a while, they'll have a stack of books and call me, and I'll go in and sign them. They're great people. It's a great little bookstore. It's in Noto. If you haven't been out there,
Right.
but you should check it out.
Is that roundtable.com, or we'll
I think
we'll
it's
find it if
roundtablebookstore.com.
okay.
Don't
Okay,
don't
but
hold
people
me to
can
that.
Google it. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Okay, last question. What do you do for fun?
I don't. No. Well, I read, I watch movies. When the weather's nice, I like to take the dog and my wife, and sometimes my son, and walk. And we like to travel when we can. We used to take a big family vacation every summer.
Great. Well, Alex Grecian, you have been phenomenal with your time. Thank you so
Oh,
much for kind of opening the window on the life of a successful author. Um, maybe someday, if you're not out on tour, we can get you into a Topeka West Jag K classroom and have a full circle moment.
Let me say, I have a website, alexgrecian.com, and there's a contact button there. So if people have questions, or if there's anything I can tell people, or advise people, just drop me a line, ask me. It goes right to my email, and I'll get back to you.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me. It was nice talking to you.
Same here. And that's this episode of Espresso Yourself with Chuck.
Thanks for watching Espresso Yourself with Chuck. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will subscribe to the channel and also check out all the videos on our Jobs for America's Graduates Kansas YouTube site.
Music for Espresso Yourself with Chuck is provided by Ben Sound Music at bensound.com. Thank you to our announcer, Kelly Newton, and producers Kim Ferdig and Don Meyer.